Welcome to the Friday 5 for January 20th, 2023. My name is Andrew Ayers. I'm an estate planning and business law attorney. I've got offices in Edina, Minnesota and New York City. Today we're going to look back at 5 questions from the week, 5 quick things to discuss that hopefully will have answers that maybe are of interest to you. Question number 1 from the week, is my old will valid from 2001? So this came up in a consultation with a client. We're working on some other documents. And at the consultation, they actually brought an entire box of documents. And as we dug into these documents, we found that over the years, there's been a variety of different wills that were drafted, but not necessarily signed. There were trusts, there were other documents, there were healthcare directives, powers of attorney. And we spent a good half an hour just looking at documents and trying to piece together what is actually signed and what's valid and what were just drafts that were never signed. In the end, the only signed version of this client's will we could find was back from 2001. So the client wondered, based on all this paperwork, what's the most valid will that's in this box? Because there was more recent ones that reflected what he was looking to do with his estate. And the answer is, if that 2001 is the only one that's signed, then that's going to be the one that controls. So obviously we're 20 years later, the client wants to update the documents, including a new will. However, if you have an old will that you've just never updated or never signed a new one, then that old will is still valid. Number 2, should I put my house into a trust? This came from a client who'd been watching some of the other videos on my channel and had read some blogs and listened to some podcasts and talked about a few of the bigger financial planners out there who have their marketing message to the market. And of course that message is everybody has to have a trust. And so the answer about whether to put your house into a trust or not really depends upon where you live and what the probate process looks like, and also what your marital situation is. So if you own the house with a spouse and have a right of survivorship, you don't necessarily need to put it into a trust. However, if you're single and you're not sure who's going to inherit your house, or you have a bunch of kids and you want to work on some different structures, then putting the house into a trust may make sense. But the answer is, don't just rely on what you've read in the blog or heard somebody market to you, or don't even rely on what you're hearing in this quick video with a quick question. You need to speak to a professional. Talk to your financial advisor, talk to an attorney, and decide whether or not that trust makes sense for you and your house. Question number 3 this week, what do I do if my lawsuit takes too long? Now the bad news is, the last couple of years have really slowed down the court system across the board. I can't think of one court system that I have practiced in that has actually even caught up to pre-pandemic levels of how fast they're processing cases. And so we have all these old cases that are slowly working through the system, and we have the same amount of new cases, and frankly, in some places we have even more new cases than we used to have. So what happens is a lot of these lawsuits, a lot of these litigations end up slowing things down. And my clients get frustrated because we think we're all set, we have something sent to the judge, but we haven't heard yet. We haven't had that order signed, we haven't had the final decree signed off on. So the short answer is, unfortunately, you're going to have to wait. You could reach out to the court, you can have your attorney ask the judge or the law clerk for a status update, but you want to be careful about that. You don't want to be constantly calling and annoying a judge, because the judge could just as easily say, you know what, I don't want to deal with this Mr. Ayers right now, just put his case to the bottom of the stack, we'll deal with it later. So unfortunately, if your lawsuit's taking too long, you can reach out to the court and see what you can do, but the reality is most things are taking too long these days in the court system. Number 4, how do I make an S Corp election? So I have a lot of clients who set up LLCs, whether we're putting rental property into an LLC, we're creating an online content business, or we're just formalizing our business generally. And for most of those clients, they want to opt for what's called an S Corp election. And then they come to me and say, what do I do for the S Corp election? Now, the first thing I'll tell you is, as part of this process, you should definitely work with an accountant. You want to make sure you have an accountant involved, get everything up to speed, and usually as part of that process, the accountant will tell you they think the S Corp election is good for you from an accounting basis, and they will be the one to file the document. The form you're looking for from the IRS is Form 2553, and the IRS has certain rules about when this form should be filed. So if you'd like to make that S Corp election, talk to your accountant. If you don't have an accountant, talk to your attorney. It's not a hard form to fill out, but you want to make sure you get it filled out on time. Question 5 for this week, should I have a termination clause in my agreement? So a lot of agreements I've reviewed recently for my clients, a lot of times in the professional services field, architects, engineers, what we're seeing is that the owner of the project has a termination clause, meaning they can cancel the agreement whenever they'd like, but my clients don't necessarily have one, and that creates a problem. Because what if you're in a contract and you want to get out of it, but you have no way to terminate the contract? You're just working at the owner's behest in this case. So what I always encourage my clients to do is make sure we put in some kind of a termination clause so that they have a way to terminate it if, for example, the owner is not paying their bills. Maybe they haven't paid what you are owed for the work you've done and you don't want to work any further. A simple remedy to this can often be just take the termination clause that's in there and make it reciprocal, meaning both parties have the same ability to terminate for the same grounds. It may or may not work in your contracts case, so what I encourage you to do is talk to an attorney, review the paperwork with them, and see whether or not the termination clause is proper for you, and if there isn't one, make sure one gets inserted. So that's our Friday 5 for January 20th, 2023. There'll be a link in the description where you can submit questions for future episodes. If you found this helpful, I'd appreciate if you like the video, and you can subscribe on YouTube for future videos. And I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. I will see you next week.